to turn to Psalm 123. Psalm 123. Unto Thee lift I up mine eyes, O Lord, Thou that dwellest in the heavens. Behold, as the eyes of the servants look unto the hand of their masters, and as the eyes of a maiden unto the hand of her mistress, so our eyes wait upon Thee, wait upon the Lord our God, until that He have mercy upon us. Have mercy upon us, O Lord, have mercy upon us, for we are exceedingly filled with contempt. Our soul is exceedingly filled with the scorning of those that are at ease, and with the contempt of the proud. The Psalms, of course, are songs. They're hymns that were used in worship, and they were very honest songs, brutally honest at times. You notice the superscription above this psalm is a song of degrees, or a song of ascent. There are 15 of these, beginning in Psalm 120 and going through Psalm 134. These are the only psalms with this title, a song of degrees. Some of them are psalms of David, but for the most part it is just simply a song of degrees. Again, they're all grouped together. Psalm 120 through Psalm 134. So it's a collection of psalms purposely grouped together for us, purposely grouped together for the readers. They're all short psalms, the longest being Psalm 132, having 18 verses. The next longest is Psalm 122, having 9 verses. And the shortest being Psalm 131, 133, and 134, 3 verses. These 15 psalms being grouped together you can view them almost as a small book of praise choruses. And that's basically what they are. In terms of content, these 15 psalms run the gamut of emotion. A lot of different emotions in these psalms. Again, each one is referred to as a song of degrees or ascent. The title indicates the function of the psalms. They were sung by groups of Israelites as they made their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, perhaps for the feast of the Passover, or the feast of Pentecost, or the feast of Tabernacles. You'll notice in verses 3 and 4 of our text, have mercy upon us, O Lord, have mercy upon us, for we are exceedingly filled with contempt or despising. Our soul is exceedingly filled with the scorning, which is extreme contempt, of those that are at ease, and with the contempt of the proud. So that's what they were feeling. That's some of the emotions that they were experiencing. They are called songs of degree because you cannot get to Jerusalem from anywhere without going up. And as the Israelites made their journey by foot, ascending the Judean mountains to Jerusalem, they would sing these songs. 15 psalms. There are also the songs of the pilgrim caravans on their homeward marches. So they were songs for the journey. Songs about going up. Songs of ascent. They would sing these songs again as they made their way to Jerusalem to worship. And they continued to sing them. And their excitement, anticipation would grow until they came to Jerusalem. And then they would sing the final song, Psalm 134, Behold, bless ye the Lord, all ye servants of the Lord, which by night stand in the house of the Lord. Lift up your hands in the sanctuary. They're at the sanctuary now. And bless the Lord that made heaven and earth. Bless thee out of Zion. If you think about it, Jesus Christ would have sung these psalms. Notice in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 and 42. Now the parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast, probably singing these songs. As you read the songs, there's much spiritual meaning, much spiritual teaching. They reveal the fact that worship requires preparation. There is no worship without preparation. None. They're singing these songs all the way up to Jerusalem. And the anticipation is building. And also, they reveal the attitude that we ought to possess when making our way to the house of God. And again, such in those days would have been an ascent. And that's what it ought to always be. It ought to always be an ascent as we go to the house of God. And certainly there are many messages that can be preached upon the subject of making our way to the house of God. But looking at the bigger picture, as you picture these Israelites ascending the Judean mountains, moving in the direction of God, how can you be heading to the place of worship and your heart be moving away from God? That's not going to work. As we make our way to the house of God, everything about us is to be moving in the direction of God. So these psalms, these songs are really parallel of what our lives ought to be, a spiritual ascent. So as you see these Israelites ascending the mountains, moving in the direction of God, their heart, their mind, everything is moving in the direction of God. It is a picture, not only of what our trip to the house of God ought to be, but it is a picture of what our earthly pilgrimage ought to be. You can't just live like the rest of the world lives, come to the Lord's Day, and then have everything move toward God. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So this needs to be our whole life. And then it will also be descriptive of our journey to the house of God. The pilgrimage to Jerusalem was extremely dangerous, but we see these Israelites, they're ascending toward Jerusalem. Our life in this world is extremely dangerous, the spirituality. But we ought to be ascending upward, moving in the direction of God. Spiritually, we ought to be moving upward, gaining in altitude, going up. Our subject is a life of ascending. Again, these Psalms apply as we make our journey or make our way to the house of God. But even more importantly than that, it should speak of our overall life. So let's consider this psalm. We see there is mention of the enmity of the world. In the psalm, there is the mention of the hostility, the oppression, and the relentless contempt of the devil's crowd. And we see the last part of verse 3, for we are exceedingly filled with contempt. And that is again mentioned in verse 4. Our soul is exceedingly filled with the scorning of those that are at ease, and with the contempt of the proud. On account of who they were and what they professed, they were looked upon by the world with disdain and disgust. It's the way it's always been for God's people. On account of who they were the subjects of ridicule and mockery. And all of this just speaks to the fact that the world proves to be very hateful and a cruel place for God's people. It is a place marked by trouble, difficulty, and hardship. A place marked by suffering and pain and affliction. It's what Jesus said the world would be like in Matthew 5, verses 10 through 12. And also in John 15, verses 18 and 19. He said in John 16:33, in the world ye shall have tribulation. You can mark it down. It's a certainty. In the world ye shall have tribulation. If the only time you can worship God is when everything is going as you like it, guess what? You're not going to worship God very often. I've got news for you, you never are. But Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:12, all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. You cannot live the Christian life being a follower of Jesus Christ and not be counterculture. If you are following Christ, you are counterculture. Automatically. That doesn't go over well. That doesn't go over well with the world. And ye shall suffer tribulation. Ye shall suffer persecution. Why is it that God's people in this country, really we suffer very little. Very little. I know people think, well, he called me a name. Oh, isn't that awful? There's a reason God's people don't suffer persecution in this country. Well, it's because God's been merciful to us. May be part of it. But that's not the main reason. The main reason is because true Christianity is so rare. People don't live the Christ life. If we really live the Christ-like life, persecution would be much greater. But that's another message. In Hebrews 11, verse 36 and 37, we read of those of God's people who had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings. Yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins. In other words, they were made homeless, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. That's persecution. That's persecution. And Peter wrote in 1 Peter 4, verse 4, wherein they think it strange that ye run not with them to the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you. And so it is still today. If you live for God, there are going to be some people who hate you. There's going to be some persecution. But as you read these Psalms of degrees, the emotions are mentioned, the sufferings are mentioned, but it's not the theme or the focus of any one of them. That's not the theme. That's not the focus. And so it is today. Whatever persecution we may experience, however someone may mistreat you, that is never to become the theme or the focus. And if it is, you will not worship. You will not worship. So, looking at this particular Psalm, Psalm 123, they mention contempt and scorn. Says their soul is filled with it. But yet the theme and the focus is found in the opening words. Unto thee, he's talking to God, lift I up mine eyes, O thou that dwellest in the heavens. In spite of the scoffers, in spite of the sneering adversaries of God and His ways, they're looking up. They're thinking about arriving in Jerusalem and worshiping God. Their eyes are heavenward. Their thoughts are upon God. If on any given day you get stuck on what somebody has done to you or what you perceive they have done to you or whatever, your focus is all wrong. The focus always needs to be, the theme always needs to be God. If you are headed to the house of God and your focus is upon the happenings of the day and your focus is upon what someone has said or done, you're not going to worship. That can't be the theme as you approach the house of God. You can't get out of your car and by the time you get to the door, your focus has completely shifted. The human mind doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. You can't just turn it on and turn it off. There has to be preparation. Now notice in verses 1 and 2, the word eyes. Eyes occur several times. In verse 1, Unto thee will I lift up mine eyes. And then 3 more times in verse 2 we have the word eyes. But in verse 1, the eyes are focused upon God enthroned in heaven. That's the focus. That's what they're looking at. This is God's sovereignty. So these pilgrims ascending up to Jerusalem, they're gaining in altitude physically, but they're also gaining in altitude spiritually. Focused upon the sovereignty of God. Focused upon the greatness of God. In verse 2, there is a description of the manner in the attitude and the spirit in which they lifted up their eyes. Notice what it says. It says, behold as, or in like manner. And then 3 times he uses the word eyes. Creating, the first thing is, has the eyes of servants look unto the hand of their masters. It says that's us. We're looking unto our master. The hands of our master. We're watching his hands. Just as a servant. So he creates this picture of servant and master. So as they're ascending toward Jerusalem, as they're approaching the house of God, they have taken the position of subjects to a master. You won't worship God without that position. As the eyes of servants look to the hand of their masters, and then it says, and as the eyes of a maiden unto the hand of her mistress. So in spite of the scoffers, in spite of the sneering adversaries of God, these Israelites ascending, gaining in altitude, are looking to God as a servant would look to their master. Why does the servant look to his master? Why does the maiden look to her mistress? And it mentions the hand in both cases. Has the eyes of a servant look unto the hand of their masters? Has the eyes of a maiden look unto the hand of her mistress? There's 2 reasons. Why are they looking upon the hand of the master? Why is she looking upon the hand of the mistress? Because they would gesture with their hand, bidding them, instructing them where to go. So these pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem are looking to God for instruction, looking to God for guidance. That's how we're to live our whole life. But also, of course, it was from the hand that they received provision. So that's another reason they're looking to the hands, because the hand would provide. And then notice what he says. So, or in like manner, our eyes wait upon the Lord, our God. The attitude is we wait upon God for instruction. We wait upon God for provision. That needs to be our life. They look to God in trust, just as the servant did the master. Look to God in reliance for His direction, for His provision, for relief. And they did so with a spirit of humility. And they did so feeling undeserving of His goodness. That's to be our life. And really, verses 1 and 2 put verses 3 and 4 in proper perspective. Verses 3 and 4 is, again, where they mention their contempt and the scorning that they were experiencing. But that needs to be put in the context of verses 1 and 2. It needs to be put in the perspective of verses 1 and 2. In other words, you do not let the contempt and the scorning and the trials of life to redirect your focus, which is upon the Lord. So let's make some personal application. Reading through these 15 Psalms of degrees or ascent, you will notice that they do mention animosity and the spitefulness and the resentment and the hostility and the scorn and the ridicule and the mockery and the relentless opposition and obstruction of the world. But again, that's not the theme. The theme is, all through every one of them, they are acknowledging God. They're confident. The theme is their faith, their confidence, their hope, their help, their contentment, their security, their delight, and their joy. All of these are in God. And we are not going to allow the happenings of life distract us from these things. So in spite of the world, their minds are upon God. It's a struggle. It's a struggle for the child of God to keep their minds upon God. But it is a struggle that you must have. You can't give in. As these individuals are ascending toward the place of worship, they are thinking God. They're thinking God. God is on their mind. Other things may cross their mind, but they're thinking God. They're thinking God. A lot of things will cross our mind in a day. But we cannot allow them to distract us from thinking God. That's our main thought. Think God. You think God, and you think correctly. You think correctly. You are in a right mind. In spite of the world that we live our lives in, you and I are not to become entangled. We're not to become trapped and overcome by the world. We do not have to be held down by the world. If we are held down by the world, we have made a choice to be held down by the world. We have made a choice not to think God. Instead, we think those things that hold us down. We do not have to be lost in the sinful maze of the world. And we do not have to descend into the mire and muck of this world. We can be a people ascending toward God. Regardless what happens, we can be a people ascending toward God. And that's also true as we make our way to the house of God. We, like these Israelites, ascending toward Jerusalem, we are ascending. We're ascending toward heaven. We have to look away from the world and look upon Him. It doesn't mean that we don't think about other things. But as these things cross our mind, look to Him. Think Him. Don't become ensnared. So we have to learn. We have to learn how to think. How to think. And there's only one way for a child of God, proper way for a child of God to think. And that's God. Think God. No matter what the world throws our way, no matter what we have to go through, think about God's power. Think about God's omniscience. Think about God's omnipresence. Think about God's immutability, His holiness, His grace, His love, His sufficiency, His care. And as you shift your mind in that direction, your entire perspective will be different. Yes, other things come up, but you're seeing it through a different lens. Your perspective is different. So no matter what a day may bring forth, thank God. Just thank God. That's what these Psalms teach us. This will enable you in everything. It'll give you strength. It will also prevent many a bad decision. It's pretty hard to make a wrong and bad decision when you're thinking God. Now, when you're thinking the world, that's your thought process, you're spiritually probably going to make a bad decision. But it's hard to make a bad decision if you're thinking God. This will cut down on many a regret. It will also keep you from descending into the mire and the muck of the world. Just thinking God. Guess what I'm trying to say is, do not allow your mind to be pulled from God. Yes, other things cross our mind. And yes, we think upon other things, but don't let those things pull your mind away from God. Because when that happens, you're in trouble. Your life is in great danger. This is how we ascend. Thank God. Well, how do you do that? Well, you get in His Word. You spend a lot of time there. You thank God. So we need to ask ourselves, is our way a way of spiritual descent? Or is our way a way of spiritual ascent? Are we going down or are we going up? What is our direction? And we need to stop several times in a day to examine where we're headed. What direction are you headed? We need to stop and ask ourselves, because in many, many times every day, our direction, whether it be thought or physically, our direction needs to change because we're going the wrong way. And as I've said many times, if you go the wrong way long enough, you'll get there. You'll get where you're headed, and that's not good. If you're going the wrong way, where you're headed is not good. And you go there long enough, you'll get there. And it won't be good. So we have to have this gaining in altitude spiritually, moving in the direction of God. And God help us that our lives would move in the direction of God. Pay attention to where you're headed. Pay attention to the direction that your life is taking. Pay close attention. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake. You don't want to go the wrong way. And if you do start going the wrong way, you don't want to stay that way long. You need to get on the right road. So God help us to always be ascending spiritually. And when we come to the house of God, may our trip to the house of God be one of spiritual ascent. And the anticipation ought to build. The closer you get to Sunday, the anticipation ought to be building. You know, what you do on Saturdays has a lot to do with Sunday. We're going to stay out to 3 in the morning on Saturday. I wouldn't recommend it. Because you're preparing for Sunday. Remember that. You're preparing for the Lord's day. And the way we travel, the direction we travel throughout the week, is probably the attitude you'll come into the house of God with. God help us. Brother Dave, if you'd come and lead us verse